Welcome back. You're watching The Front Row. We're talking about the budget right in the midst of a pandemic, the coronavirus. And we're looking at what some of the allocations that were made, what did they mean? What's in the bigger picture? What does it mean for us? The economic stimulus package by the government that experts are now saying will not mean much for the ordinary Kenyan. My panelists, once again, Dr. David Ndii, an economist. We have Mr. Bill Okero, former Senator Mandera, former chairperson of the Senate Finance Committee, as well as Rose Mwaura, who is the chairperson of ISPAC, which is joining us, of course, as the national chairperson of ISPAC. So thank you very much for staying with us. We're on to the last quarter of the program tonight. Remember, you can join us by sending in your questions and your views. Tweet us at Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE. The hashtag to use is The Front Row. You can as well send your questions on slido.com. The hashtag there as well is The Front Row, and the Zoom details will be put on your screen if you want to join us by way of Zoom. Before we went on a break, a lot of conversation and submissions on the debt, our debt management, what should be in our debt strategy. Back on matters COVID-19, all panelists now seem to agree that perhaps this should have been a COVID-19 budget where we direct or channel most of our funds towards that. We didn't see that happening. So to you, Rose, being the national chairperson of ISPAC and constantly advising the government on some of the measures to put in place, that the budget is already out, that we've already seen the allocations, and to where we are told that COVID-19 is something we would have to learn to live with. In short, we'll have to adapt. So what then do we do in terms of mitigating the already ongoing effects that we are feeling? What can we do differently?
Thank you very much. I think a couple of things are quite important. And the first one is to make sure that we have proper funding to the healthcare sector so that people can get treatment and, of course, testing can be done. I think we are all in agreement that COVID-19 will be here with us for a long, long time. So it's important then that we have availability of testing. So for example, if you look at the hospitality sector, they need to reopen the hotels. However, for them to reopen, the Ministry of Health has said that everybody has to be tested. For every, and only, but for some reason, the government hospitals are not willing to test these employees, so they must go to the private sector. In the private sector hospitals, the cheapest test is about 7,000 shillings. So you're finding that very few hotels or organizations in the hospitality sector are going to open. So we need to have a situation where the government must buy, either testing kits and reagents and everything in bulk so that anybody, all the people who require a test can actually get that test. So really, healthcare is going to be our first priority. Our second priority is also going to be around food security. So we also need to just make sure we're channeling a lot of, we're challenging the right resources towards agriculture, make sure that we can be food secure. So again, around value addition, making sure that the farmers have the input. It would have been very important for us to consider some reduction of some of the taxes, such as value-added taxes on some of the inputs to make it cheaper. And I know that there's some voucher system that is being introduced. So I think that needs to be an area of focus. Of course, the other very important area of focus is going to be now support to the SMEs. I believe that the government can actually work with a lot of the banks because they have a lot of cash and come up with some credit guarantee scheme to allow this money to be used to support SMEs, so that SMEs can then either re-employ or can go into production and so forth. Because without SMEs, you know, coming back up, opening up and re-employing people and production, we are really not going to be able to restart the economy as it is today. So those would be my 3 areas of focus as we look at this area.
Mr. Kairos, you talked to us about that. The other day in a conversation with, once again, ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi, he mentioned that yes, we have an expansive budget, one that he called or termed as overambitious. But he also said that one of the things that the CS failed to factor in is the political environment. Does it present a situation where it will be easier to implement this budget and some of the projects that the government is involved in currently? I'd like you to speak to that. How important then would be the political environment, especially now? We're already seeing it, and we're right in the middle of a pandemic. How do we go? Where do we go from here?
You know, budgeting, Wandera, is a political process. One of the things that I did not expect, frankly, to hear in this budget was the use of words like legacy, you know, and big fours and those things. I thought these are extraordinary times. In the whole world, globally, we have never seen something like this. Millions of people in this country have lost their livelihoods, and thousands, and the situation might even get worse. And so we really expected an extraordinary budget that would focus on, as Rose said, some of the issues, you know, addressing health issues, and of course, focusing largely on how to, you know, save livelihoods and help Kenyans. Not legacies, not, you know, my government. You know, I think the challenge you have is ideological, where governments, our governments, time and again, talk about themselves and not about the people. I think governments are elected to represent people. So you should listen. When Kenyans say, for example, from revenue of 1.63 trillion, you want to pay nearly 1 trillion to service debt. That leaves you with less than 600, and you want to borrow another trillion to try and survive. And the whole country is telling you, please cut down on your debt. And to do that, all you need to do is rationalize your government expenditure. For heaven's sake, you don't have to spend all the money that you want to spend because you want to leave a legacy. You need to look at what are Kenyans saying. You need to listen to your people. You need to listen to your electorate. You need to listen. We need government to start listening to people. And I think this is the challenge in the political system. So I don't think really much about implementation. That's our weakest point in this country, whether it's the constitution or the budget. Implementation is a challenge. The minister themselves acknowledged that the single biggest challenge they have in treasury is absorption of funds when it comes to development. This year he budgeted 633 billion for development. He knows very well, and he acknowledged that it's still a major challenge. We rarely spend half of our development budget, especially development funds that are coming from development partners and others. So I think with the political situation that we are in today, and the country being highly polarized than it was, a couple of years ago, I think politics will play a significant role in even how some of these projects will be implemented, or where resources will even be channeled in some of the, and that unfortunately will play out very clearly, because you have to be. We're in a situation where today you have to be with us, or you're with the terrorists. That's if you use the what Bush said. So I think unfortunately our political leadership, particularly Parliament, National Assembly, I think it's really that it's time that we looked at the people who were elected and what do they want, what are the people saying, and really put your foot down on some of the things that the government wants to do. Taxes on basic things that really affect people. Businesses are the ones who are paying you tax. And look at how efforts are being made to try and punish business even in this extraordinary circumstances. You're telling businesses that you must pay 1%, tax 1% on turnover. That would be ridiculous, really. I mean, the businesses where turnover is billions, but the profitability is 1% or 2%. And for whatever reasons, whether you claim tax allowances or whatever, you must. So I think some of the challenges that they have, every possible action is being made by this government to try and raise revenue. And I think, so what happens is that consequently, you are stifling business, you are stifling entrepreneurship, and at the same time, are oblivious of the fact that we're in a very, very challenging environment where today nobody's traveling to the rest of the world, nobody's going out to look for businesses. You are giving horticulture 1.5 billion. This is one of the largest sources of forex to this country, one of the largest industries in this country, horticulture. Today it's on its knees. You're budgeting 1.3 billion, 1.5 billion to assist that sector. How is it going to help? You are telling SMEs will give you credit guarantees, loans, to the extent of how is it going to help this sector? And already banks in this country are not willing. The government should have put its foot down in this budget and say all banks, any bank that needs a license in this country must give at least 20–30% of its loan portfolio to the SMEs. Make it a requirement. Let them look for a way, and the government should guarantee, should there be any default or whatever, one way or the other. I think there are many ways in which the government can be more innovative and think out of the box and come up with some other radical measures. These are extraordinary times, and we did not expect, things to be done in the usual way.
All right. Thank you. My next question to Mr. Ndi, I'd really like to tie it to one of the questions here being asked by Leonard K., who says, considering that the pandemic might be with us for longer than anticipated, a chunk of the revenue will most likely be spent on healthcare. So how does such skewed budget affect our economy? Anything positive out of it? That's a question from Leonard K. that I'd like Mr. Ndi to really try and respond to. How does such a skewed budget affect our economy? And perhaps then, every year we talk about the budget, but from some of the responses we've gotten online, Kenyans say they don't feel it on the ground. So what is the disconnect? Where is the disconnect, Dr. Ndi?
First, I mean, the question of what the reallocation of money to public health, the magnitude is not that big as things go, as to have a macroeconomic impact. But ordinarily, even if it was quite significant, as long as in the short run, as long as they are spending in one sector economy, shifting spending between sectors doesn't have such a big effect on the economy in the short run. It may have impact in the long run if you're talking about reallocation between investment and consumption and stuff like that. But basically, reallocations do really have a big effect on the aggregate demand. In terms of impact of Kenya not feeding the budget, they really shouldn't. Because the purpose of the government budget is to provide services. So the question is the government providing services? That's the question that one should ask. What has actually happened and why there is a disconnect? What people are feeling, why the government budget is growing bigger, but people are struggling more, is a different thing. It is because the government has crowded out the private sector. And the government has crowded out the private sector in the economy. So the government is, for instance, in the credit market, the government is now the biggest borrower in the economy. Most of the money, even foreign money, is going into government infrastructure projects, which, as I said, are low return investments. And that is the thing which causes the disconnect that people are feeling. But because generally government, other than service delivery, which is the recurrent budget, government spending should be catalytic on the government capital spending. It should be catalytic so that government spends on a particular infrastructure or something, and that crowds in private spending, private investment, and that is then what people feel a multiplier effect benefiting them directly. That process is not happening. In fact, it is very perverse. It is getting worse. Now, coming back to the question of COVID-19, the impact of the economy, I think one of the things which is really missing in the COVID-19 and the economic debate impact is the economics of COVID-19. What is the economics of COVID-19 in terms of the policy analysis of what you're dealing with? Now, while people are talking about stimulating the economy, SMEs and all manner of things, the biggest impact, besides the disruption, there is a disruption effect of economic activity because of the social distancing and the lockdown measures and all of that. But the bigger impact is to do with how economic agents respond to risk and uncertainty. Because one of the things that the COVID-19 has created is huge risk and uncertainty. That's gone up quite a bit. So one of the things that that does is that on the private sector side is a collapse of investment. Businesses do not invest. They're not going to invest when the future is so uncertain. So the investment component of GDP, private investment component is basically collapsed. The other one is consumers. Consumers have gone into survival mode. So those people who have not lost their income, even those who have income, are spending only on necessities. So that is actually a much bigger impact than the disruption effect. And that is going to last much longer. And even if you try and support businesses, if, as we are doing in my household, for example, we are probably spending, spending only on food and a few basic necessities, and I'm sure most of the households are doing exactly the same. Even if you try and simulate SMEs, there will be no demand because we are not buying. And we are not going to start buying and spending money on discretionary things. We are not going to start buying furniture and all those things we have postponed, or a new microwave or whatever, until we are much more certain about the future. So adapting to COVID-19 and trying to restore when we are able to get, so we have to accept that as long as COVID-19 is creating this sort of shock, we are talking about, we are going to have to come to terms with an economy contracting by probably up to 40%.
Right.
So we cannot actually start talking about stimulating business. There will be no demand. We cannot talk about credit guarantees. Nobody is going to borrow in a market which is, for a market, to invest in a market which is dead, where demand is dead.
So quickly, in under a minute.
I don't hear that recognition coming in.
So quickly, in under a minute, because we are wrapping it up, where do we go from here?
We have to adapt. I think we are still in denial. We are still thinking that COVID-19 is a passing cloud. We are going to have to accept that the economy is going to shrink probably by 40% for the next 2 to 3 years. And then we ask ourselves, how do we adjust and live accordingly? But this idea that there are things we can do to turn the clock back or to sort of change, there isn't. It's a huge shock. We are now realizing that COVID-19, we thought that it wasn't going to come our way. It might pass. It is now quite evident that we are also going through the same pandemic cycle as other parts of the world has gone. That is what we need to come to terms with. There will be no legacies, no stimulus, no all that sort of stuff. We just need to hunker down and ask ourselves, how do we go through this sort of crisis over the next 2 to 3 years? Right,
way to end it. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're really out of time. Dr. David Ndii, Managing Director, Africa Economics, as well as an economist joining us here tonight. FCPA Rose Mwaura, National Chairperson, Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. Thank you for joining us tonight, as well as Bill Okero former Mandera Senator and former chairperson of the Senate Finance Committee, just helping us break down what this economy looks like during this pandemic and whether the budget would do anything to salvage the situation. From experts, they say not much. Thank you for engaging with us tonight. Was not able to take a lot of your questions. Always a pleasure to have you tuned in.